Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our complimentary webinar series for U.S. federal government contractors. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. today. You probably found out about today's webinar through our newsletter, which reaches over 23,000 federal government contractors and service providers. Today's session is complimentary and also recorded. You can find the recording on our website and YouTube channel about 24 hours after the webinar, though usually even sooner. We have over 540 webinars on our YouTube channel. This includes all 52 parts of the FAR, all 52 parts of the DFARs, and hundreds of webinars on strategic and tactical topics. If you'd like to advertise in our newsletter or in any of our upcoming webinars, please email us at hello@jenniferschaus.com. And a little bit more about us. We are a specialized consulting firm focused on working with established federal contractors. We work with product, service, and software firms across the globe. For more information about our services, please visit our website and select About Us. And as I mentioned, today's webinar covering the FAR supplements is complimentary and recorded. We began this series in January 2022. And you can find past recordings on our website as well as the future schedule with all of the registration links. Here's just a look at the Wednesday schedules. As you can see, we've already covered most of the FAR supplements, but we'll be winding down this series on the 24th of August with the Veterans Administration. And then on Fridays, we cover the same agency or department in a Playbook series. The Friday webinars discuss upcoming bidding opportunities, contracting trends, small business resources, and oftentimes feature a government speaker. And as I said, the full schedule and past recordings are on our website, this time under the Playbook tab. Please note that our summer soiree for U.S. federal contractors is next Monday, July 18th. Again, next Monday, July 18th. Anyone can register as an attendee, and we also have corporate sponsorships available. We're expecting 100 to 200 federal contractors. The registration link is on our website under the Events tab, or you can find it in my auto signature when I send out the recording from today's webinar. Agencies and sponsors will be announced as they confirm, and we hope to see you on Monday. We'd like to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors for the event on Monday: C3 Integrated Solutions, Insperity, White Oak, FuTrend, and First National Bank. And from the government side, we have confirmed attendance from Health and Human Services, the State Department, and the Naval Air Systems Command. Please purchase your ticket under the Events tab. And now we'd like to thank our sponsors who make this webinar series possible. First, we'd like to thank the Virginia PTAC. Virginia PTAC is based out of GMU in Fairfax and offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you're interested in learning more, please use the links provided to see what PTACs can offer. Next, we'd like to thank the Federal Business Council. The FBC creates and manages virtual and in-person meetings and events to connect industry and government thought leaders, product providers, and solutions with government programs that use them. The FBC works with a variety of federal agencies to connect government and industry in the form of in-person and virtual conferences, training events, policy dialogue, and outreach. Over the last 40 years, FBC has become a comprehensive resource for connecting industry and the federal government. Next, we'd like to thank Dastin. Dastin is an IT and cloud solutions provider working with corporations, the military, and government agencies to lower their costs, increase scalability, improve operational efficiency, and meet compliance regulations using targeted cloud-based solutions. Dastin is a certified partner of Oracle NetSuite, a premier tier Google Cloud partner, and certified partner of Cisco, Virtue, AO Docs, and Authenticate. For more information about Dastin services or to schedule a complimentary consultation, please email Joe Alston or visit the Dastin website. Next, we'd like to thank C3. C3 ISIT develops tailor-made technology solutions that increase efficiency, bolster productivity, and improve business processes. C3 is the leading provider of managed IT services as well as compliant cybersecurity solutions for federal contractors. C3 works with defense contractors to achieve and maintain CMMC 2.0, DFARS, and NIST 800-171. Contact C3 to learn more about the CMMC 2.0 Readiness Program. Contact information is on your screen. Next, we'd like to thank Rlj Financial Consultants. Founded in 2008, Rlj Financial Consultants is a customer-focused, quality-driven, minority and locally owned provider of commercial insurance brokerage services. Their services are designed to maximize your return on investment in managing the risk to your business. Call Roderick today at 202-832. Oh my gosh, so sorry. 1417 for a free consultation and insurance quote. Lastly, we'd like to thank the PubK Group. The PubK Group publishes news. Oh my goodness. Publishes news and insights for government contractors, agencies, and counsel. Every day, PubK delivers news on bid protests, contract disputes, new laws and regulations, cybersecurity requirements, false claim acts activity, and development in mergers, acquisitions, and the GovCon community. In daily news briefs and in-depth conversations and podcasts and webinars, PubK leverages its deep bench of government contract experts to keep you up to date on fast-changing government rules and expectations. And every January, PubK presents its week-long annual review featuring more than 150 GovCon experts across a dozen panels recapping the year's top developments. Participation and CLEs are free to subscribers. Visit PubK online at www.pubkgroup.com. Thank you again to all of our attendees and our speaker for joining us today in our FAR Supplement series. Today, we are covering the FAR Supplement on the U.S. Agency for Global Media. So I'm going to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker today is Adam Munitz, and he represents the firm FH&H. And as a reminder, we don't take any questions. So if you have any questions for Adam, his contact information will be displayed here and at the end of the presentation. So thank you for joining us today, Adam. I'm going to hand it off to you.
Great, thanks, Madeline, and thanks to everyone that joined. Again, my name is Adam Munitz. I'm a partner at FH&H Law Firm. We are a boutique firm based out of Tysons, Virginia, that focuses primarily on defense, security, and intelligence communities. My focus at the firm is specifically on international trade and government contracts. I should just go out of my way briefly to thank my colleague, Emily Spence, for putting these great slides together. As usual, she did a fantastic job. And I'm looking forward to discussing this material with you today. So Madeline, if you could please advance the slide, that would be great. Thank you. So this is a relatively niche supplement. It's relatively brief. So I'm going to try and keep my presentation today as tight as possible. But I think we're going to easily cover everything in a short amount of time. I think this is a really fascinating area. The United States Agency for Global Media Summary, the USAGM, which is now called, as we'll get to, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, is little known in the Washington community, but at least in the national security space, I've heard a lot of talk over the past few months about the fact that the U.S. government is not doing enough to counter disinformation and misinformation, and really could be leveraging Voice of America and other tools to counter that misinformation and disinformation. So I think that the national security community, the government contract community, is going to certainly hear more about USAGM in the near term. So I think it's certainly timely. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the USAGM? Just a little bit of background. USAGM is a U.S. agency, an independent agency of the executive branch of the United States government. And as I mentioned before, it was previously the Broadcasting Board of Governors. That name was changed on August 22nd, 2018, as part of a larger modernization efforts. As you can see here, USAGM actually has a very broad reach, a very broad portfolio. You see all the different media outlets that are tied to it, and it's actually considered an arm of U.S. diplomacy. It's a U.S. diplomatic effort and provides news and information to more than 394 million people in 62 different languages through its network of entities. Manages Voice of America, which is probably the best known of all of them, but also Radio Free Europe, or Radio Liberty, the Office of Chief of Broadcasting, Radio Free Asia, Middle East Broadcasting Networks, and the most recently created entity, the Open Technology Fund. And these networks operate relatively independently but receive funding from the USAGM. So just taking a step back and looking at these different entities, you can get a sense for how USAGM and how the U.S. government has kind of allocated its focus and its commitment. You can see that obviously it's trying to provide that voice, that media exposure in critical parts of the globe. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background on the structure of the USAGM. As noted here, in 1994, Congress enacted the International Broadcasting Act, which consolidated the various state-operated broadcasting networks under one agency. And the act established that 8 members of the 9-member board were appointed for 3-year terms by the president, and a later amendment ordered that the 9th member be the Secretary of State. Again, there's that diplomatic, core component. Furthermore, that act mandated that the board be composed of 4 members of each political party, so that the board would be bipartisan in nature, and that the president would select one of the appointed members to act as chair of the board. So there's a bipartisan history that's baked into the USAGM, which is obviously important from a balanced media standpoint. In 2017, the NDAA relegated the board to an advisory role and consolidated the decision-making authority with a single presidentially appointed chief executive officer. And then the BBG changed its name to USAGM in 2018. Again, you start to see in 2018 more focus being put on media and messaging from the U.S. government standpoint, which I'm sure had to do with this rebranding in 2018. The current CEO is Kilu Chow, and she was appointed by President Biden on January 20th. Next slide, please. Okay, getting to the nexus to contracting and contracting processes. The USAGM enabling statutes provide a great degree of latitude to procure outside the methods and processes set forth in the FAR. So USAGM has a choice in that regard. They do not have to use the FAR. However, currently, USAGM has opted into the FAR procedures voluntarily and subject to the agency supplement found here in Chapter 19. USAGM's Office of Contracts is responsible for soliciting, negotiating, awarding, and administering contracts that support USAGM, its 5 networks, and the more than 50 news bureaus and transmitting stations around the world. Under the current leadership, USAGM's office also manages and administers the agency's government purchase card program and shapes agency acquisition policy and guidance and champions competition and fair opportunity, and is, according to the leadership, committed to meeting government-wide small business goals and supporting socioeconomic programs by providing small businesses with meaningful business opportunities. But it's not bound by SBA and size determinations per se. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview of how the supplement is structured. It consists of 5 chapters, each of which are relatively brief, as I've noted here. Chapter A is just a general overview. Those of you that are familiar with the FAR will understand that structure. Subchapter B is acquisition planning. Subchapter C is contracting methods and contract types. G is contract management, and H is clauses and forms. Next slide, please. So let's just dive straight into subchapter A. That contains the supplements related to defined terms, contract awards to current and former government employees or their family members, and guidance for the contracting office to issue solicitations. Next slide, please. So looking at 1901.000, the first part of that subchapter A contains really the pro forma enabling provisions to explain how the terms in the supplement implement and supplement the FAR's policies and procedures for USAGM's procurement purposes. Next slide, please. Again, as we noted before, the USAGM has opted into using the FAR procurement procedures for its procurements. But I would just note that under 48 CFR 1901.103, this bottom section here in applicability, the USAGM specifically stipulates that unless there's an exception or deviation, the FAR and these supplementary regulations apply to all acquisitions by the USAGM. So they laid it out quite clearly in that subpart there. Next slide, please. Okay, looking at 1901.1, these next two sections help provide the context and how to apply the supplements to the FAR for USAGM procurements. I would note that section 1901.104-2 explains that some supplements modify current FAR provisions, and some of the supplements have no FAR provisions being referenced or merely supplements to the FAR, so they merely add. So just a quick note on that. Next slide, please. And as you can see, I'm not going to read through each of these subparts. I don't think that's particularly useful. What I'm trying to do today is just give you some commentary on what the key takeaways are here. Again, it's a short supplement, so you can certainly browse through it at your convenience. But I would like to just impart my thoughts in reviewing this supplement. So these two sections here, 1901.403 and 1901.404, supplants FAR parts 1.403 and 1.404 respectively. And here where the FAR says the agency head is required for approval of deviations from the FAR, the USAGM has designated the board procurement executive as the individual with the authority to review and approve deviations from the procurement policies and processes otherwise laid out. So just some kind of linguistic changes there, agency head over to board procurement executive. Next slide, please. So these last two sections in part 1901, that is 1901.601 and 1901.602, replace FAR part 1.601 and 1.602-1. Here, the authority to contract is vested in the Director, Office of Contracts, which is called the Board Procurement Executive. And again, that's a shift from the FAR where the agency's authority to contract is vested in the agency head or their delegates. So under the current structure, this shifts the procurement power from the CEO, who's arguably the agency head, quote unquote, to the head of contracts. And contracting officers receive their certificates of appointment or warrants for contracting from the Director, Office of Contracts. Next slide, please. So here in 1902, we really see the standard definition of terms and words, and this contains additional definitions that are related to USAGM for this whole supplement. And it supplements specifically the definitions found in FAR Part 2.101. You'll see that the definitions update references to the contracting officer and are somewhat unique to the structure of USAGM as an independent agency. You can also see that this section probably needs to be updated in light of the current statutory changes to USAGM structure. For example, references to BBG and Broadcasting Board of Governors should be updated to USAGM and United States Agency for Bow Media. So I'm sure we'll see those changes soon. Next slide, please. Okay, Part 1903. There are two supplements related to the award of contract grants or other monies to employee members and their families under 1903. That's improper business practices and personal conflicts of interest. The first supplement on this page, section 602, modifies the language at FAR Part 3.602, and the second supplement on this page, that's 670, generally supplements FAR Subpart 3.6. So generally under the FAR, specifically Part 3.6, contracting officers are prohibited from awarding contracts to any government employee or an entity owned by a government employee without authorization from the agency head. Here, USAGM has implemented a similar structure but goes further and limits awards to any former government employees as well as their family members and businesses owned by family members of current or former government employees. So this language expands the FAR's limitations for awards that will directly benefit government employees to awards made indirectly or through business entities and family members as well. So unlike other provisions which limit certain activities by former employees, This agency supplement installed a blanket rule on all employees within 2 years following separation from employment. What's the takeaway? The takeaway here is that any entity doing business with USAGM should be very cautious when hiring any former employees or family members of current or former family members. I would just note that the term family member is not defined here. So this regulation does create some ambiguity as to whether or not we're talking about household family members or a wider net of extended family. If that's a question that comes up in your particular practice or your particular area of work, just work with your counsel to navigate that ambiguity. Next slide, please. Okay, 1904. This supplements Part 4 and specifies when a solicitation may be posted. Just for background's sake, Part 4 sets forth certain general administrative procedures that the contracting office is expecting to follow. Here, the USAGM supplement appears to be memorializing the generally accepted principle that the contracting office should not issue solicitations for projects until the funding is approved. And specifically, this supplement provides that USAGM's contracting office is generally barred from postings of solicitations unless they already have the funds, they have good reason to expect the funds to be available, or the solicitation expressly states that the contract is subject to the availability of funds. So that concludes the supplements in Subchapter A. Let's pivot to Subchapter B. Next slide, please. Subchapter B of the agency supplement contains supplements related to suspension, debarment, and brand name or equal product procurements. Next slide, please. So 1909.4, this first agency supplement under Subchapter B relates to the USAGM suspension debarment procedure. These sections supplement the suspension debarment procedures and policies stipulated under FAR Subpart 19.4. Under Section 1909.404, USAGM is required to keep a list of all persons who are debarred, suspended, or otherwise ineligible for awards as part of an internal list, and also is required to notify GSA so that the list of suspended or debarred persons or companies may also be listed on the excluded parties list on SAM.gov. Next slide, please. 1909.406 looks at the investigative and decision-making process related to debarment and suspension that the agencies are encouraged to establish. So under this process established in the section, contractors are given an opportunity to submit a response, as with Subpart 9.4, and may present information to a 3-person fact-finding board to determine facts based on a preponderance of the evidence. Just one thing to note is that under Section C of this subsection, USAGM must give a written copy of the debarring official's final decision. I'd say what's unique here is that you have a panel of 3 people on a fact-finding board. That's typically not the case with Subpart 9.4 suspension debarment processes, where there's one SDO that will make his or her decision. There have been a handful of recent events that I would just note that have made the news regarding USAGM's debarment process. In 2021, USAGM sought to debar several entities which were part of a bribery and mail fraud scheme that resulted in the former USAGM contracting officer and the CEO of one of USAGM's former contractors both pleading guilty, and another employee of the contractor being indicted. And in that matter, if I recall correctly, the former contracting officer was sentenced to about 2 years in prison in March 2021. And in 2019, the then CEO of USAGM proposed one of USAGM's nonprofits, Open Technology Fund, for debarment. The effort to debar ended after several whistleblowers questioned the efforts, and that CEO then resigned his position in January of 2021. Next slide, please. Okay, specification standards and other purchase descriptions. Part 1910 prescribes policies and procedures for agencies to conduct market research prior to issuing a solicitation. This first subsection, 1910.004-70, specifies when a contracting officer with USAGM should and should not use a brand name in a procurement, and encourages the contracting officer to describe the functional or physical characteristics of the product so that equal non-brand items might also be offered. Next slide, please. And then the second subsection, 1910-004-71, which also modifies FAR Part 10, specifies when a contracting officer is preparing a solicitation, it should encourage competition, and a brand name should not be used to exclude other products that would otherwise meet USAGM's needs. I'll just note that there is a significant emphasis here on ensuring that components purchased by USAGM are not limited to a single vendor or brand. So that's a particular point of emphasis for the supplement. Next slide, please. And then this third section, or rather subsection 1910-004-72, further modifies FAR Part 10, specifying language in a solicitation for a brand name or equal item in the solicitation. Next slide, please. And then to kind of boil down these last three subsections, they all stipulate in the aggregate that if an offeror fails to offer a brand name product or equal, and the solicitation does not specify the brand name or equal product, the offer cannot be rejected for failure to offer the brand name product. These subsections also specify that the brand name product rules may be adapted for negotiated procurements or for small purchases with, quote, open market limitations. Next slide, please. So we went pretty deep into the weeds here. Let's step back and take a look at subchapter C, contracting methods and contracting types. This subchapter modifies FAR Part 13, requires clauses for the maintenance and retention of key personnel in FAR Part 15 negotiated procurements, and third, provides for the award of multi-year contracts that are up to 5 years. Next slide, please. Okay. Let's go. Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. Let's make sure I'm keeping track here. Okay, the final agency supplement under subchapter C relates to supplements the multi-year contract requirements limitations found in FAR Part 17.105. So under the FAR, contracting officers are encouraged to award multi-year contracts if they're more efficient in terms of money or standardization. Under 22 USC 1472B, which is, as you can see, referenced in this supplement, USAGM is permitted to enter into contracts that exist for up to 5 years or 7 to 10 years for circuit capacity to distribute radio and television programs if the contract serves the best interest of the government, the method of contracting will not inhibit small business participation, and there is a need. So those are the thresholds there to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, heading to our next subchapter, that's subchapter G, contract management. This contains 2 sections that supplement FAR Parts 42 and 46, respectively, and relate to designation of the contracting officer's representative, which is, in this case, called the authorized representative, and also notes and outlines when to utilize warranties. Next slide, please. Let's go back by one, please. Sorry. Thank you. So this section, 1942.202-70, supplements FAR Part 42.202, which allows agencies to create a policy on delegating the contracting officer's authority for certain acquisitions. So here, the USAGM has actually established a process for delegating authority to, again, an authorized representative, but limits the authorized representative from binding the USAGM to full contracts or major modifications to the contract, and the authority must be stipulated in each contract for which the authorized representative has authority. So I think it's worth browsing that one at your convenience, but that's the key takeaway from our perspective. Next slide, please. Okay, on warranties, this section, 1946.704, supplants FAR subpart 46.704, which allows agencies to direct use of warranties in an acquisition. So here, the USAGM has established a process for when warranties are deemed appropriate and invokes the process laid out at FAR 46.703 for determining when a warranty is appropriate. Under this scheme, the contracting officer will consider the various risks posed to the government, the cost of the project, the enforceability of a warranty, the trade standard, and whether it will impact service when constructing the warranties when determining if a warranty is appropriate for a particular procurement. All right, next slide, please, to subchapter H, clauses and forms. This section contains this subchapter contains two sections that supplement FAR parts 52 and 53 and relate to contractor terms and agency forms used in the procurement process. Next slide, please. Okay. Make sure. Could you go back by one slide, please? Thank you. So this supplement contains a handful of modifications to the clauses that are inserted in solicitations and contracts issued by USAGM. So looking at each of these, 1952.102-2 modifies FAR Part 52.102 by requiring supplemental provisions and clauses that are incorporated in the solicitation or contract to be incorporated by full text. This is, I would just note, a departure from the language in FAR Part 52.102, which encourages provisions and clauses to be incorporated by reference, not full text, to the maximum extent possible. A review of current solicitations from USAGM suggests that in practice, though, USAGM follows FAR Part 52.102, incorporating clauses by reference, and not necessarily by full text. So just another area of departure there. Subsection 1952.104 modifies FAR Part 52.104. So whereas under FAR Part 52.104, modifications to contract provisions and clauses are authorized, are not used unless authorized by the FAR, here USAGM appears to generally follow the provisions at FAR subpart 52.104, but also requires approval by the Director, Office of Contracts to authorize modifications under this section. Next slide, please. Okay, this part continues the modifications to the clauses that are inserted in solicitations and contracts issued by USAGM. So here we have subsection 1952.70, which requires contractors to seek approval from the contracting officer prior to removing, replacing, or diverting key personnel or key facilities under the contract. And this clause is naturally to be inserted into negotiated procurements as prescribed under subsection 1915.106-7. Next slide, please. So this part continues the modifications to the clauses that are inserted in solicitations and contracts issued by USAGM. Here we have subsection 1952.227-76, which requires contractors to grant unlimited rights to works developed in the performance of the contract. I would just note this clause is another example of this supplement needs to be updated, as the prescribing section 1927.405G has been removed from the supplement. As a result, this section appears to be largely unused in USAGM's modern contracting efforts. Next slide, please. Next, you have 1952.227-77, which requires contractors to submit shop drawings to the government and the rights to those drawings, and to flow the provision through to its subcontractors at any tier. So just a key notification from an IP standpoint. Next slide, please. Finally, we have subsection 1952.227-78, and that subsection allows the board to destroy all prints and videotape records, but stipulates the board will provide a certificate of destruction to the licensor as applicable. This language would prevent the government from having an obligation to send licensed works back to the owner after the conclusion of a contract. Next slide, please. And lastly, subpart 1953 of the agency supplement provides for forms used by USAGM. And it's our understanding that those relevant forms are available upon request from the USAGM's contracting office. Next slide, please. So thank you for participating in this brief discussion of this supplement. Again, I think that we're all going to hear about USAGM a lot more as the government ramps up its efforts to counter disinformation and misinformation. As it does so, these provisions, which can seem dry and arcane, will become increasingly important. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you to Jennifer and her team and Madeline for having me. Thank you again to Emily Spence for her support and preparation for this webinar, and look forward to speaking to you all again soon.
Thank you, Adam, for such a great presentation. Should you have any questions for him, his contact information is there on the screen. Thank you to everyone who participated. The recording and slides will be on our website and YouTube following this webinar. And we look forward to seeing you on Friday as we cover the procurement playbook for USAGM. The registration links are on our website. And just one last final reminder that our U.S. Federal Government Contractors Networking event will be this next Monday, July 18th at the Kennedy Center. So make sure to get your tickets on our website under the Events tab. Thank you for attending today. Have a great rest of your day. This concludes the webinar.